Hello and welcome to the Ryan Mack Show. Usually I'm on Saturdays live, but I did a special before the debate preview. Tonight's episode is going to be a big episode, a lot of Supreme Court stuff going on. So let's get right into it. Those of you watching on YouTube, Facebook, Rumble, X, wherever you're at, welcome. We're going to dive right into it. So the Supreme Court, as you know, in recent years, they have become a 6-3 majority, conservative majority, but I wouldn't really call the Chief Justice Roberts a conservative, nor would I call Amy Coney Barrett conservative either. But they have had landmark cases that have been decided. Most notably, Roe v. Wade has been overturned, and that has led to a giant backlash across the country, as we've seen in recent elections. Democrats have used that to power up the abortion debate. They've used that to strong arm decisions going forward in local states, and the Biden administration has used this as a weaponization to go after conservative states for limiting when you can get an abortion. So these are some of the cases that have been controversial, and we're going to get into it. But first, there was a decision with that, the Roe v. Wade case. Before the decision was handed down, there was a leak about what the decision would look like. Is there another leaker this time? There seems to be the case. Now, if you've been paying attention to the news cycle, you'll notice that earlier, I think last week or so, Joe Biden issued an executive order giving amnesty to about 500,000 illegal immigrants married to American citizens. So this was a family unification process by the White House. Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre had a hard time explaining the thinking behind this or how Biden might come up with this. Now, it's interesting to note that this this executive order, was just handed out days before the next Supreme Court decision on this. And I'll get to that decision in a minute. But here is, I'm going to try to share it. KJP on the executive order. So here she is speaking on the executive order. So if you listen to what she says it's been broken for decades. While that is true, President Trump's worst years with regards to the border was in the 900,000s. Biden's one of his first years in office was in the millions. We have upwards of 20 million people or more in the country currently due to Biden's policy. So to say on one hand the immigration system is broken, and on the other say you've done everything you can, you haven't, because you've opened the floodgates. One thing that Biden has been pressed on is if he's been down to the border, he goes to the border in places and where it's not a problem. And when I had the congressman on a few weeks back, when he told me about the process in which Congress is supposed to work, you remember that executive orders are supposed to kind of complement a congressional um, law. So Congress makes laws about the border, and if it's missing something, the executive order coming after that is supposed to kind of gap that. And this is not what happened. This is a Congress that is deeply divided. You have a slim majority by the Republicans who have been forceful in their attempts to stop these pork bills going through by Democrats. The border bill that Chuck Schumer and McConnell and these rhinos in Congress have put forth that has said, "Oh, this is the toughest border policy we've had to date. We need to pass this." They flip the flipperoo on you. They now make it so that Republicans are complaining about the border and that Republicans have not done things on the border. This border is on fire because the direct negligence to close it by the Biden administration and the hapless, idiotic, moronic, lying, just complete imbecile, the DHS Secretary Mayorkas. That's who is responsible for this border. It's not Trump. Trump's not the president. Biden can close this border today, not by executive order, but by getting the Border Patrol to do their job and stop hamstringing them. You don't use an executive order to say that I'm going to close the border. This border bill, this executive order does nothing. So Friday, which just goes back to the main point of the whole show, is there another leaker? Supreme Court leaker. We saw one with a Roe, the decision. They had another mistake today where they leaked a decision that wasn't supposed to be leaked and they took it down, but that was their own doing. They apologized for that. But this is different. You have an executive order handed down for immigration for spouses. So the executive order says you can't deport spouses of American citizens who are non-citizen. But Friday, the Department of State versus Munoz, the 6-3 decision, the court ruled that U.S. isn't required to admit non-citizen spouses. So the Federalist co-founder, Sean Davis, has some questions. This is from his X post. Is there a new leaker in the Supreme Court? This is also on Town Hall. You can find this. Just days before the Biden administration announced a radical new executive order to legalize the immigrant spouses of citizens, even if those immigrants were in the United States to commit crimes or were here legally. It was very strange timing for such an oddly specific EO. Now we know why. So Friday, the Supreme Court ruled 6-3 that the U.S. is not required to admit immigrant spouses of American citizens in a case involving an MS-13 member whose spouse was a U.S. citizen and who demanded legalization. So from this nation's beginnings, he goes on to say, admissions of non-citizens in this country is characterized as favor and not right, the court ruled. Somebody at the White House clearly was tipped off, Davis says, about the unannounced decision, which explains why the White House rushed out a shoddily written and argued new executive order to open the border even more. The Biden regime knew how the Supreme Court was going to rule, and it sought to preempt the court with its absurd executive order. So now his question to everybody is, who exactly is leaking information on rulings to the Biden White House? And he's got his thread on Twitter as well, on X. The person, after an internal investigation that never was leaked to the Dobbs decision, never named. We have no idea who he is. Now, it's interesting to note about these cases. One thing to note is that the Supreme Court has been attacked constantly for their legitimacy ever since these cases. So Roe versus Wade, if you're unfamiliar, obviously it's about the abortion debate, that abortion was basically a right constitutionally. And the court correctly decided that it's not explicit in the Constitution, therefore it was never a right to begin with. And what is not written explicitly in the Constitution goes back to the states. The states decide. Well, states did decide. If you were in a more conservative state, you had limits placed on abortions and access to abortions. And if you lived in a more liberal state, more progressive state, you had more liberal restrictions. You had up to birth. You had up to no restrictions at all for when it comes to abortion. You can go across state lines and get an abortion. But that was determined by federalism. States have rights. If it wasn't explicit in the Constitution, it was left to the states. But you had the Biden administration suing the states for limiting abortions, which makes sense. So with that, you have liberal Justice Sotomayor also stepping out. and saying something completely stupid about the ruling. So when liberals always have a dissent over a ruling they don't like, of the three liberals, you have Sotomayor, Kagan, and now the newly confirmed justice in the last year, Jackson. When there is dissent of a ruling they don't like, they make it a parallel to another ruling that could be had. So she makes this absurd ruling that um, this case, the Munoz case, would allow the Supreme Court to take up gay marriage ruling and abolish gay marriage, which not a bad idea. It was meant as a covenant between man and woman, and it was for the design of creation. You can't create when you have two sticks together. See what we did there? Happy Pride Month. Liberal-leaning Supreme Court justice is not a Newsweek, not a conservative-leaning outlet. Justice Sotomayor argued that the court encountered landmark gay marriage ruling Obergefell versus Hodges in a recent case, Department of State versus Munoz. So she compares the two cases, warning it could have negative implications for same-sex couples. So she used the fact that you can't legally admit non-citizen spouses into the country, regardless if they're married to a civilian or not. You can't. That's just, they're not a citizen. She equates that with the gay marriage law, Obergefell versus Hodges. So she explains in a 6-3 decision on Friday, the American citizen who was challenging the order, she was championing for legalization. Okay, so the U.S. consulate in Salvador denied Cordero's visa application because he was found to be affiliated with a gang member MS-13. The consular officer, however, didn't disclose this reasoning for denying the application. And since he's not a U.S. citizen, there was no constitutional right to enter the country. He can't elicit the consular's office for reasoning or challenge the denial of his application. Since Munoz was the citizen, she challenged the office decision with the reasoning, quote, the right to live with her non-citizen spouse in the United States is implicit in the liberty protected in the Fifth Amendment, and the denial of her husband's visa deprived her of this interest, therefore by triggering her right to due process. The consular's office violated her right, she said, by declining to disclose the basis for the being inadmissible. But visa denials are ordinarily unreviewed by the courts. Justice Coney Barrett explained in the majority opinion, the Fifth Amendment that says no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, property without due process of law. However, Barrett writes for the majority, which was joined by the other 5 conservatives, that Munoz's argument was based on the premise that the right had to bring her non-citizen spouse to the United States as an enumerated constitutional right. To establish this precedent, she had to assert the right is deeply rooted in the nation's history and tradition, which she cited the 97 case Washington versus Glucksberg. She cannot make that showing. So Congress's long-standing regulation of spousal immigration included through bars on admissibility, cuts the other way. Sotomayor didn't have it. She dissented along with Kagan and Jackson on the ruling. In her dissenting opinion, Sotomayor cited the case Obergefell versus Hodges. Of course she does. She makes everything about gay marriage, and she twists the ruling to mean that the conservatives are going to attack gay marriage. So she uses the Obergefell versus Hodges, which grants all U.S. citizens the right to same-sex marriage. The right to marry is fundamental, she said, in a matter of history and tradition. The right to marry, man and woman. Late on her dissenting opinion, Sotomayor brought up Obergefell and Hodges again, writing, they rejected the majority, does today, inconsistent with the approach of this court and used in discussing further fundamental rights of marriage and intimacy. So she twists it and she says that Munoz may be able to live with her husband in El Salvador, but it will mean raising her U.S. citizen child outside the United States. Others will be less fortunate. She warns the burden must fall heavily on same-sex couples and others who lack ability for legal or financial reasons to make a home in the non-citizen spouse's country of origin. So she equates non-legal spouses to same-sex decisions. Makes sense. Again, liberals always twist things to make it their fit. We've got more stuff on it. We got Supreme Court. We got the debate. Of course, the debate is tomorrow night. I'm going to get a little bit of preview of that. But we got some more cases. But the liberals will always attack the legitimacy of the court. This is a conservative leaning court, if you want to call it that, I guess. But they will attack the integrity, and no one further does that than Nancy Pelosi. Nancy Pelosi attacks legitimacy. This is the Daily Wire. They've gone rogue. You notice that whenever liberals disagree with the decision, or like the recent ousting of radical Jew hating leftist Jamal Bowman from Congress, they attack the institution itself. There was raging Democrats on Twitter saying the outside forces of money and Jewish PACs got Democrat ousted. Yeah, you mean voters with help of financial firms voted a radical socialist out. That's what happens. That's democracy, right? Y'all want to champion democracy until it doesn't do what you want it to do, and then you want to change the rules. This is no different. Pelosi attacks legitimacy of the court, saying they have gone rogue. She was in an interview with CNN, Anderson Cooper, former Speaker of the House. This is what she said. No, I think they've gone rogue. It's most unfortunate. It's unfortunate further to see how the other justices, what happened to the Chief Justice? Did he go weak or go rogue? I don't know. The same thing with these members of Congress. If I can take it back to that, because as tragic as that night was, and they were coming after me with a bullet in my head, they were going to hang and have a gallows for the Vice President of the United States. Okay, Nancy, have another fifth of vodka. So she goes on to say, I have no confidence in the Supreme Court. I think that some of the decisions they have, see, I respect their point of view. No, you don't. Clearly you don't, because you just said they've gone rogue and you don't have confidence. So you can't respect their point of view. If they have a point of view about a woman's right to choose, okay, but that's not what they're going to do to advocate for a point of view, run for Congress. She was clearly drunk when she was talking to Anderson Cooper there. But that's what they do. The liberals resort to bad-mouthing the institution of the government and the system when they don't get their way. Now, contrary to Pelosi's thoughts that this court is radical and conservative, it's not. It really isn't. So this piece on the reason suggests that the court isn't as radical as you think. So there was an activist. I think I remember talking about it last week, and maybe not have the Rahimi case, which basically ruled 8-1, and Justice Thomas was the lone dissenter, and that case determined that if you were in a protective order or domestic violence situation, you could be temporarily disarmed from your guns as opposed to threat. The Rahimi case should have never been taken up by SCOTUS. This activist, Shannon Watts, took to social media to respond to the 8-1 ruling and said that, this should have never been taken. So she said this tweet was taken down. It was deleted. To even question whether domestic abusers should have guns should just show how extreme this court has become. First of all, Shannon, since you've then deleted your tweet, I have some words for you, because I read through some of that decision. The Rahimi case, although on its face is common sense, those who commit domestic violence or violent acts should have further removals of rights to have a gun temporarily. However, the dissenter, it was an 8-1 ruling, so 8 justices ruled that yes, this is how it should be. But the one dissenter was Clarence Thomas, a big Second Amendment advocate, and he didn't rule it based on the common sense that if you commit a crime, you should not have your gun. He was simply stating that the Second Amendment is still within the realms of having due process. In those cases in which you are a domestic violent attacker, you still have due process. Those cases have underlying laws that you have to follow when determining how serious a threat someone is. Now, if someone is using a gun in a domestic violence situation, then I think there's a no-brain look. But you don't just blanket take away somebody's rights to own a gun unless there's cause. So you have to go through the process in these cases. For instance, in the protective order, you can lay it out. There's a law. So did he commit crime? Did he become violent with the spouse? Okay. So you still have a due process you have to follow, and that should be the case, but that's no longer the case according to the left. They want no due process. We're seeing that right now with conservatives. We're seeing that with the United States former president. That is the case. They don't want due process. They don't want your rights. Everybody has a right to due process. It's in our Constitution. So Again, for the thing to say that they are corrupt, rogue, or out of touch, and they don't think about people in domestic violence situations for the guns to be overturned, they wanna immediately take away a person's right to own a gun. So the decision, by pretty much all accounts, was a victory for Watts. She's the founder of Moms Demand Action, a gun control advocacy group. But what's stunning is that the Supreme Court's ruling overturned a decision from the U.S. Appeals Court in the Fifth Circuit. The justices had not taken up the case, they would have left intact a decision that prohibited the government from enforcing bans on gun ownership for people Watts strongly believes to should not have guns. So on one hand, she's complaining about this should have been never taken to the Supreme Court. She neglects the fact that they actually overruled the Fifth Circuit appellate courts and overturned their ban on forcing the government to take away people's rights. So she's not real bright. But the real story here is that not for some activist that is little known yelling about the court decision. The story is actually a much wider backdrop. It's the panic of the Supreme Court. You hear Democrats talk about we need to expand the Supreme Court. We need to take out this 6-3 majority. They want to expand it to 13 judges. They want 4 more liberal judges. They think 4 more liberal judges will impose balance. What they really mean is that they'll have a 7-6 liberal majority, and then they can start imposing their liberal agenda. That's what they say is balance. Why stop at 13? Because what you did with the Harry Reid rule and confirming judges across the country at a simple majority of 51, now you're going to set a precedent that anytime a president or Congress is in power of either party, they can just keep adding justices. What's to stop at 13? Why not 17? Republicans win again, and they can move it to 4 more, and then 4 more after that, and then 4 more. So why stop at it? What's the number of justices that are okay to strike a balance? The extreme radical wing of the Democrat Party has become just that. So if anybody's going to call out the extreme radical part of anybody, it's their own party. The conservative majority on this court have not been conservative by the extreme or even radical. There's been a lot of decisions handed down that I have not agreed with. And 2 of the justices have voted with liberals a lot of the time. This recent case that we just had today, there's more cases I'm going to go into that are still left to come, and some important decisions, especially the presidential immunity case. But in a 6-3 ruling today, you had Amy Coney Barrett side with the liberal justices, and you had Alito, Gorsuch, and Thomas rule with dissenting by themselves. The landmark case of whether or not the Biden administration has colluded with a big tech social media. They censor conservatives, especially during COVID, when they deemed it misinformation to talk about anything else other than getting a vaccine or wearing a mask. And they ruled incorrectly today that the states, Missouri and Louisiana, did not have standing. These states were not just conservative states that had conservatives and people hurt by these collusion attempts by the government and social media. These were actual cases of people having their rights taken away. And the Supreme Court came out today. But that wasn't a rogue Supreme Court today. They ruled 6-3. Where's everybody at of the backlash of that? Why aren't we talking about the First Amendment being violated by the government and big tech? Because it doesn't fit their narrative. They want your First Amendment taken away. That's what Democrats want. So they're not going to come out in droves and attack the Supreme Court for a decision they like. They never do. I don't agree with it, but you don't see me burning down a federal courthouse over it either. The rogue, extreme Supreme Court thing is done. There's nothing extreme about this court. In fact, they've ruled more against their conservative ideology than not. They are determined that most of the cases have gone by the ruling of the Constitution. However, this was incorrectly ruled. So getting back to this, when this whole thing about being radical and extreme, we hear the conservative majority is extreme, they're radical. We think the ideological fracturing couldn't be more stark of a contrast. People of a course entitled to their views. I mean, we all have opinions, but if you look at the recent cases, like I just broke down, there haven't been a radical, extreme conservative decision that came out and was controversial. The one that was controversial was correctly decided, the Dobbs case. What wasn't explicit in the Constitution goes back to the states. That's how this works. The decisions at the beginning of this term, the example, laid the ground for something historic. And it was historic unity, not division. Of the 18 rulings released from December to April this term, 15 of them were unanimous. Think about that. Even the liberal justices on the court were unanimous in 15 of the 18 cases. Previously, the stats at the SCOTUS blog, the most unified court has been at any part of the term in modern history. So what about the infamous 6-3 splits where the court breaks along partisan lines? There are indeed many 6-3 rulings, but there's never any news on them. It's not all party lines. Some of the justices rule with Democrats and some of them run with conservatives. A lot of the cases, like I said, there's been 9-0. You don't have to look very far to find more examples. Last week, there was an article on Erlanger versus the United States in which the court strengthened the right to trial by jury and due process for criminal sentencing. On its face, a more cultural currency with left-leaning folks, right? Lefties, you want due process for criminals. Neil Gorsuch's opinion in the 6-3 was joined not only by Chief Justice Roberts, Clarence Thomas, Amy Coney Barrett, but also by Sotomayor and Elena Kagan. So it's not always the 6 conservative leaning and the 3 liberals. That's just more often than not, we've seen that they've ruled side by side in some of these cases. But you're going to have everybody pick and choose their battles in cases they don't like. So another case that was popular. So after the Supreme Court decided that the Biden administration could not, in fact, hand out student loan forgiveness, the Biden administration has decided, the hell with the Supreme Court decision. I'm going to go ahead and cancel student loan to the tune of billions of dollars. Well, a federal judge has said you can't. This out of NBC News, a lefty organization, a lefty media print. I didn't make this up. A federal judge Monday temporarily barred the Education Department from allowing additional loan forgiveness under a key component of Biden's student debt relief plan. The judge's order halted the cancellation of federal student loan debt under the income-driven repayment plan known as SAVE after several states sued over the program. So the SAVE Act was anybody who is in default, apparently, could we now be put back into repayment plans and be adjusted and all this stuff. There's still too much of that I don't understand. But the administration was preliminary enjoined from any further loan forgiveness for borrowers under the final rules SAVE plan until such time this court can decide the case on the merits. So this was U.S. District Judge John Ross in his opinion. So the SAVE plan came about after the Supreme Court last year rejected the Biden administration's broader effort to address debt under its pandemic-era relief plan, which was about $20,000 for federal student debt and about 43 million borrowers. So the U.S. District Court rejected an effort by the Biden administration to dismiss the case, saying the states that brought the suit had standing and are likely to succeed on the merits of their argument that the loan forgiveness provisions were exceeding the Secretary's statutory authority, meaning you can't just go willy-nilly outside the scope of Congress and cancel student loans. Now, I think this is Missouri Attorney General Andrew Bailey, one of the 7 states attorney generals that brought the lawsuit. He applauded the ruling, quote, by attempting to saddle working Missourians with Ivy League debt, Joe Biden is undermining the constitutional structure. Today's ruling is a win for the rule of law, every American who Joe Biden was about to force to pay off student loan debt. I couldn't agree more. So there's another big decision, the federal judge halting more student loan debt because the only body of government, the only branch of government that has the authority and power of the purse is Congress. They are the ones that can do it. And even Pelosi, when she was Speaker of the House, said Congress was the only one with the power to do it. Imagine that. All right. So what cases have been handed down? There was the Rahimi case last week. There was the big tech censorship case. And there's still a lot more. We still have the presidential immunity case. Probably will come down Thursday or Friday. Liberals have blown their heads off and said that this is unconstitutional. We should expand the court and blow it up because they're just waiting and delaying the presidential immunity case. So they still have about a dozen so cases still undecided, and they could reshape the law on everything from abortion to social media. The justices are also still weighing former Trump's immune from criminal prosecution in the election interference case against him, 2 months after hearing arguments. So they typically issue all the rulings at the end of the month. So June is coming up, and it'll probably be Thursday or Friday. And this term is expected to continue into early July. So we could see most of them come out Thursday and Friday. So they've heard 61 cases this term, 12 remain unsolved. So here are some of the major undecided cases they still have yet to come out. And this was as of the 14th, but there's still obviously more. We've had a couple more come down since then. Last week was the Rahimi gun case, and this week was the big tech censorship case that was incorrectly decided. Presidential immunity was the biggest one. Donald Trump is arguing that former presidents are immune from prosecution for official acts they took in office. That meaning the indictment that he faces on charges of election interference must be dismissed. So while he was president, he was questioning the election, well within his official duties. You, as sitting president, before you're roosted out of office, you can question the election legally, and that's what he did. The Supreme Court has previously ruled that former presidents can't be sued in civil cases for what they did in office, but has never weighed in on criminal immunity. Leftists argue that if you give a president criminal immunity, he can do whatever he wants and damage the country. I tend to think this would go one of two ways. If you give Biden immunity to do whatever he wants in office, he will ruin the country. However, if you think that presidents should not be immune from criminal prosecution before or after office, while they're in office, then maybe you should go back and go after Clinton and Obama and every president formerly that had some shady deals while they were in the White House, because that means they were on official duties and they can be prosecuted. So the decision is twofold. So presidential immunity, he's arguing that should be immune while they were in office from any criminal liability. The timing of the decision may be as important as the outcome because, as you know, the election coming up in November, the court, even if the court rules he's not immune, the trial may not even take place. It's Trump's trial, Washington, D.C. So January 6th is also another one. A former Pennsylvania police officer is challenging the validity of the obstruction charges brought against hundreds of people who took part in a violent assault on the Capitol on January 6th. Trump faces the same charge of obstructing an official proceeding. The issue is whether a law meant to discourage tampering with documents sought in investigations can be used against Capitol rioters. So January 6th case, also another big one that we could hear, that could have a lasting impact on the unlawfully imprisoned January 6th protesters. Another one, emergency abortion. This is the second abortion case on the docket this year on whether or not doctors can provide emergency procedure in emergencies in states that banned abortion after the court overturned. This is a big one. In a case out of Idaho, Biden administration says abortions must be allowed in emergencies where women's health is serious risk. Now, that is one that's a gray area. I can see how that could be an issue. The state argues that its strict abortion ban does allow abortions to save a woman's life and does not expand exceptions for health risks. So it doesn't need to expand exceptions because it already has it. Some of the states that went too far is that they didn't allow abortions at all. You can have challenges to those, but if you allow a health risk exception, then you don't have to expand this. So that the emergency abortion expansion is what's seeking by the Biden administration. We can also see one on homelessness. The most significant Supreme Court case in decades on homelessness centers on whether people can be banned from sleeping outdoors from shelter space lacking. A San Francisco-based appeals court decision that said amounts to cruel and unusual punishment. I'm sorry, but if cities would stop hammering people with taxes and jobs would stop fleeing, maybe you wouldn't have as much as a homeless problem. Maybe if you put them in expensive hotels, they wouldn't be on the streets. But leaders from California and across the West say that the ruling makes it harder for them to regulate homeless encampments, encroaching on sidewalks and other public places. Advocates say it would criminalize homelessness just as rising costs have pushed the number of people out of permanent places. So that could be another big one. They should be banned from sleeping outdoors. That's not how we want an appearance in our country. You should be able to local funds. If it's not happening here in Illinois, if it's happening in San Francisco, make San Francisco pay for it and California pay for it. Build shelters for the homeless. That's what should happen. Another case that is important that could completely obliterate liberals' heads altogether is the Chevron case. It's a 40-year-old decision that has been cited thousands of times in federal courts and used to uphold regulations on the environment, public health, workplace safety, and consumer protections. The decision is known as the Chevron case because it calls on judges to defer federal regulators when the words of the statute are not crystal clear. The decision has long been targeted by conservatives and business interests who say Chevron robs judges of their authority and gives too much power to regulators. So that could wipe out all the red tape by the EPA, the environmental nuts, the climate nuts, all this, the Chevron, and basically say that you don't have authority, only Congress should. Judges should have the authority to shut down the ones who aren't really making the law. Social media, this one, yeah, so this one's already taken up yesterday, or I think today was the ruling, a 6-3 ruling. The fact that Biden administration colluded with big tech and social media, YouTube, X, Facebook, TikTok. They all had censorship platforms that were cutting out conservative thought. So that case was handed down incorrectly, as I've explained earlier. Purdue Pharma, this one controls the fate of a nationwide settlement in OxyContin maker, Purdue Pharma, that would allocate billions of dollars to combat the opioid epidemic, but also provide a legal shield for members of the Sackler family who own the company. So the settlement has been on hold since last summer after the Supreme Court has agreed to weigh in. So Big Pharma could be taking a hit with that also. There's one in air pollution. So energy producing states and the steel industry want the court to put the EPA's air pollution fighting good neighbor plan on hold while legal challenges continue. The plan aims to protect downwind states that receive unwanted air pollution from other states. Okay, whatever. The SEC regulatory case, that's also one. So there's that. All right, so do we have another leaker? We don't know. But based on the immigration case that was handed down, in which the executive order was preemptively deciding, and then the 6-3 case was come down, we may have another leaker. So that's something to watch out for, especially these cases come out in the coming weeks and days. So the debate. I'm not going to go too much into a preview because it's tomorrow night, and I think DPB and I might be doing a live showing of it with Rumble. That is to be determined. Either way, I will probably do it live on Rumble. I can sit through it and give commentary afterwards too. That's fine. But we jokingly went through, if you watched our show yesterday, some of the fake rules by Babylon Bee. But there are a set of rules that the two agreed upon. And my take is, if Trump said no, he would have been called a loser, a coward. He wouldn't debate. See, he's not going to debate Biden. So he pretty much was boxed into the assumption that he had to do it. So he didn't really have a win-win here. So CNN is going to be hosting it, and I believe 7:30 or 8:30 is the debate. Don't quote me on that, but around that time. Multiple outlets are going to be hosting it. Rumble's going to be live with it. I think Blaze TV is going to be doing their viewing of it. I will probably be doing something with it. I don't know yet. If DPB wants to stay up that late past his bedtime, he can join me. So President Biden and Trump agreed on tomorrow night on a set of rules to avoid chaotic scenes from recent elections. So if you remember, my favorite, and I had bookmarks, but I don't have any. There we go. So the debate between Biden and Trump in 2020 was dynamite. You had people going, they had been going back and forth and cutting off each other mid sentence from things they were talking about. It really takes away from the substance of the debate altogether. The purpose of the debate, I just watched a Lincoln documentary on which he debated Stephen Douglas for presidency. And it was well thought out. It was kind of with short little humor takes. There were some good banter back and forth, a intellectual debate. But 2016, you had um, Trump versus Hillary, and you had him make some shots about Hillary. And I'm trying to find it here. But the debates between the Republicans back then during the primary and the presidential debate between Hillary uh, and Trump were some memorable snapshots. And I'm gonna try to find the clip where Trump goes off on her because it's really funny. So let me pause it here. What happened with the Haiti Foundation? So there's one clip here that during the third presidential debate in 2016, Trump told Hillary what happened in Haiti with the Clinton Foundation is a disgrace. So here is that clip. I'm gonna play that one. And there we go. So here he is asking her about what happened in Haiti. Little Haiti. Yeah, so what she went on to say there was that she babbled and lied about it. So there's another one, if you remember about the I'll stop. All right. So one thing about the Haiti Clinton Foundation. So Haiti had a horrific tsunami and it tore up half the island, and pretty devastating. And then you had the Clinton Foundation funnel in money. Well, I mean, just hordes of money, and none of it went towards the cleanup and safety of rebuilding Haiti that was destroyed. In fact, they built a textile factory on the other side of Haiti that wasn't hit by the tsunami, and they profited of it. So that is what Trump was getting at with Hillary. But that was a good moment here. Now another one, the moment where Hillary says it's just a good thing that Trump wasn't in charge of law and order in our country, and this is what he said. Yeah. So he those are the debate moments where you want to have a crowd, because the crowd's reaction to a snapshot is all politics are snapshots and sound bites. And Trump is the master of creating snapshots and sound bites. That was probably the most overplayed part of that debate. She tried to hit him about not being tough on crime, and he absolutely obliterated her. Now, of course, we know he didn't throw her in prison like he should have. But those are the kinds of things at debates you like to kind of come out with a left hook and a right hook back at each other. But the crowd reaction that they're not going to have, because Biden can't have booing and he has to have chocolate ice cream and he has to sit down and take a dump before he craps himself. He can't have that. So those are the kinds of things you look for in debates, the things that kind of excite the crowd and then get the crowd into it, because you're not supposed to cheer. But here's another one. Hillary got called out by Trump for being a Russian puppet on the stage, and she had the guts to tell the truth about him and call him out for his lies. Okay. So he's a Russian puppet apparently. So, and there's more from Biden 2020. And that was the infamous laptop. So while I'm searching here, I'll take it off share. So as you know, the famous Hunter Biden laptop wasn't real, according to Joe Biden. It was Russian disinformation. And what we come to find out, those 51 idiots who said they were in the intel community was absolutely wrong. Hunter Biden's laptop is real. And so you don't have a dispute. Now we know that even the 51 intel agencies are still saying it's not real, but we know it was. And now we have um, Trump bringing up evidence in 2020 that it was. I'm trying to find it here. Oh, here we go. You know what? Here's a reel. This is by Maze Moore on Twitter. You can watch a little bit of it. But instead of Biden coming out and telling the truth and the laptop thing was a lie, here's just a few minutes of him lying after lying after lying after lying. So this is what the fact checkers are going to do for Biden because it's on CNN. Jake Tapper, Dana Bash are worthless pieces of scum, and they're going to side in with Biden and not ask him the tough questions. But here's a nice little roll, and I'm going to get it up here on the screen about the Biden lying. Two 100 million people. He he was the only president in modern era to take on Putin. What? 800,000 people have died. That's it. That didn't stop anything. When you sat down in the restaurant, you could take your mask off, but when you stood up, you had to put it back on. It was magic. The plexiglass had more vomit and spit and everything on it than it actually protected anybody. What a dumbass. Antifa's just an idea who burned down buildings and created all kinds of damage for the property. Yeah, the idea that Antifa was just an idea. No big deal. Mostly peaceful burning buildings. George Floyd died because he had a legal amount of fentanyl in his system. He died not because he was knelt on his neck. He died because he had drugs in his system. He was a drug addict. He was not a martyr. He's a criminal and a drug user. That's why he died, Joe. Please keep going. Trump paid more to African American colleges than Biden ever did. But here's another one. It's an important note. I think you guys can see this. The spouse of CNN debate moderator was one of the 51 spies who lied to steal the 2020 election. Hmm. This is Jeremy Bass. We talked about it yesterday. He is the ex-husband of the and also a former intel agency who falsely claimed Hunter Biden laptop was a real disinformation operation. So now that the laptop is real, what is Trump going to hit him with? Biden has come out and still not said what he was going to do. But here's I'm going to finish up the some of the parameters of this, and I'll go into what I think Trump should do before we get out of here. So the rules, obviously, I had some laughs yesterday and gave up. The microphone needs to be edible, and you have to sit down before you crap yourself. But there was a set of rules. You're going to mute the mics in between each person talking. They were proposed to prevent a repeat of the first debate, the 2020 cycle, where candidates regularly attacked each other's character. Trump repeatedly interrupted and heckled Biden. Biden went on a retort and just told him to shut up and all that stuff. So both Biden and Trump will have they've agreed to the rules and committed to participate in the televised debate. Here are some of the big changes. Commercial breaks. For the first time in recent history, the debate will feature 2 commercial breaks during the 90-minute broadcast, which is different from years past. The campaign staff will be permitted from interacting with their respective candidates during the intermissions, denying them the opportunity for strategic consultations or touch-up of the appearance. No opening statements, which is kind of really dumb, but okay. So, like in the past debates, there were opening statements by each candidate. There will be no opening statements. Instead, each candidate will deliver a 2-minute closing statement at the conclusion. There was a coin toss, which I think Biden let Trump be the last person to speak and chose not to have that. So that's nice. It will begin with a question. Each candidate allotted 2 minutes to respond, and then this will be followed by 1-minute rebuttals and all that stuff. So muted microphones, no notes, no notes from Nick Miller, New Girl. Both Trump and Biden will stand at identical lecterns. Biden's on the right because his right side's better than his left, so he's going to be on the right. And they will be muted throughout the proceeding except when it's time to speak. This could be good or bad, not allowing Trump to call out the bullcrap that he's spewing in the middle of his bullcrap spewing. But I don't think it'll be that big a deal. You'll actually be able to let Joe Biden speak because that's what's going to make him fall the worst is you let him speak. If he's going to say something stupid and have shit fall out of his mouth, let him speak. Let him catch himself. So no notes. So Biden can't have a note card, but he will probably have the questions enhanced in a steroid cocktail. He will be able to be given the questions by CNN almost automatically. He's spending a week in Camp David preparing for a 90-minute speech by doing nothing, but having diarrhea bouts. Each candidate provided a pen, notepad, and a bottle of water, no props or written notes, which I think is funny. Trump should be allowed a prop. It should be the check from Biden from Ukraine should be. This big one is weird because you typically like to have a live audience to kind of gauge the reaction of how the debate's going. There's no live audience. A stark departure from tradition. There'll be no audience, and audience members are instructed to remain quiet, but obviously that was not always followed. So there's some of the changes that we have. That's pretty much all I got for tonight. I wanted to hit on the Supreme Court cases and a little bit of the debate preview. Like I said, I'm going to go probably live. We'll be live tomorrow during our show regularly at Thursday, 4 to 5, and we'll probably set up something during the debate. I want them to just speak through it, so I'll probably just set it up and let everybody speak through it. But that's all I got. Thanks for joining on, and we'll see you tomorrow from 4 to 5 right here in DBB. See ya.